Hello, everyone. For those that have recently joined, thank you all for being here. We will get started, and in the next couple of minutes, I guess a few more people will be joining, but to respect the timing that we have, and for all of you that joined in time, we will begin. So thank you again, all of you, for registering and for being here today. My name is Agustina De Luca. I am Data Engagement Manager at Open Ownership. And I am accompanied by my colleague, Stephen, who's around. Steve, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Good to be here with you today. My name's Stephen Abbott-Pugh. I'm the head of technology for Open Ownership. So, as you saw in the emails and where you registered, these is a series of 3 workshops where we will present the benefits of structured beneficial ownership data and how to use it. Over time, Open Ownership has developed many tools to analyze and use structured data, and so we want to show you how they work, how they can add value to your work, and for respond to any questions you might have if you have tried them out in the past. And all these different tools can be used either if you're a data analyst, a policy advocate, a developer, so it can serve to different objectives. So we're really looking forward to learning from you what you would like to be using these tools from, and what challenges you might be having. So today, this first workshop, it will be about introducing the global landscape and beneficial ownership data availability, why we need common structured data and common identifiers. We will present the beneficial ownership data standard, how it works, its key components and fields, and then do a series of exercises and homework to use the bots data generator through a spreadsheet. The next one, we have 2 upcoming ones by late October and mid-November. The next one will be focused on the Open Ownership Register and dataset, a tool to investigate it, and on the data visualizer and how to build appealing stories. So as you see, we are recording this session. We want to be able to share the recording and the video with those that couldn't join. So please bear this in mind. We ask you to please keep your mics muted so that they don't interfere with anyone that is speaking. And if you want to intervene, please raise your hand or post your request on the chat, and we will be reviewing the chat all the time. As you might have seen in the different materials we shared, the idea today, if we can go back, Steve, sorry, for the first one, the main objectives of these series of workshops is to not only to present the different tools, but also to build a data analysis community that increase the understanding, the creation, and the use of BO data. And so we really want, that's why we really want to hear from you on how these can add value to your work and to increase this community of people using the data. And by the end of these 3 workshops, ideally, you would be able to work more with structured data, create your own bots data, compare it with international data sources, and be able to use the variety of tools that are available out there. So before we get started with today, you will see that you'll have a series of polls that will pop out in your screen. We want to know where you are coming from. So if you can please, in 10 seconds, respond which sector do you represent. We want to know who you are. We'll give it 10 more seconds. Okay, so as you see, we have mainly civil society organizations representatives joining us today. We have some from journalism, from private sector, and from government. So we have a quite varied audience, although almost 50% are from CSO, so that's great. There's lots of interest from data users to learn how to use this for your projects. And now I would like to know which region you're coming from. Okay, that was faster. So we, as you can see, we have a lot of people joining us from Africa. So there's a very big community of practice there, and we've been working a lot with many people and organizations and governments from Africa. So I know there's lots of interest about this topic there. A lot of people from Asia and from Latin America. And I'm sorry about this being in English. This is the first time we're doing this. So ideally, if there's interest and demand, we can do others in Spanish or in any other language that is there's demand from. And then I would like to know if you have BO experience, and I know that we asked this in the survey, but as we had lots of registration, and I want to know which people actually joined us today. So whether you have experience in working with beneficial ownership data or not. And just like disclosure, we won't be touching today on the specifics of beneficial ownership, what is a beneficial owner, all the complexities that the topic might have. We are assuming a small level of understanding of the concept. We will focus more on the data itself. So we assume that you have read the materials we shared and that have a basic understanding. And so we have a quite divided audience today. We have most people have never worked with BO data. It's only half and half, around half and half, but we can see that half of you have never worked with BO data. So ideally, this can be a very good introduction for you to get familiarized, not only with the concept, but with the particularities of the data. And that's what we will be focusing by the end of today. And then finally, I assume you have there is less people that have actually worked with structured data, because we know that and we will get into the details of what is structured data in a bit, but I assume that many of you that have worked with beneficial ownership information might not have worked with big bulk data and lots of databases on this. So again, ideally, this can be an introduction for you, demystifying how structured data works and how to use it more and more, and what are the benefits of that. And my assumption was correct. 94% of you have never worked with structured data. So it's very important for us to know who we're talking to and how to focus our presentation on, and to think of further engagements and yeah, how complex to make it. So with that said, if we go to the agenda for today, we have an hour and 45 minutes ahead already. We have already done the introductions. We will present the beneficial ownership transparency, global momentum, and why structured data matters. After that, we will respond any questions you might have about Stephen's presentation. And then the second half of today will be focused on the bots data generator, which is a spreadsheet that we have developed for you to come from unstructured data to structured data, and then to be able to use that to compare it internationally or to visualize it, and we'll get back to that. And we will have a very small task for you to do today in this workshop, and then a homework for those that want to get deeper and more familiarized with the generator, to do some homework that we can review before the next workshop. The next one, please. So, and just to put some context on this, this workshop is being held under the Opening Extractives program, which is a joint program implemented by Open Ownership, which is the organization that Stephen and I represent, and the EATI, the Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative, with the objective of increase the data availability and use of beneficial ownership information in the extractive sector in particular. So we are providing technical assistance to governments, we are building the capacity of local stakeholders to use the data, and we are building a global community and communicating insights and the important aspects to increase the global awareness of the topic. So as I said, we won't get into the specifics of beneficial ownership, but just to mention that just to have everyone on the same page, we assume that you all know that a beneficial owner is a person that has ultimately the right to some share of a legal entity's income or assets, or the ability to control its activities. So a beneficial owner is not only a shareholder, is not only a president, but it can also be someone that has voting rights, that has a veto rights over a company. And we know that companies own companies, or legal arrangements own companies. But when we say about a beneficial owner, it's about a person. It's a physical person that is behind an ownership chain, however complex that is, that gets some benefits or exercises control over that company. And when we say beneficial ownership transparency, or BOT, and when we say a beneficial owner, it's BO, so you might hear us say BO or beneficial owners as synonyms, and BOT for beneficial ownership transparency. So it's about the transparency angle. It's about knowing who is or who are those beneficial owners behind those companies, and how they are controlled by them. Next one. So, and just for you to like the context out there, we have seen that over 110 countries have committed to beneficial ownership transparency, and that could be either through having a law in place, it could be by high-level political commitments in events or international fora, it could be through OGP national action plans, or it can be through subscribing to the EATI, being an implemented country of the EATI, because the EATI standard requires to disclose beneficial ownership transparency from extractives companies. So this is the commitment on all the colored countries, either in violet or with the lines through it. All of those colored countries have committed to both. But when we actually go to the implementation of those both reforms, we can see the difference in which those countries that have actually developed a register. And this can be, and as you see, those that have just in purple, and those that have a closed register, that have implemented that beneficial ownership register, but that it's not available for the public. And those that have the lines, the green lines strike through, are those that have public registers. So we have very, very limited information in Latin America. We have very limited information in Africa and in Asia. And Europe has been developing, it's a bit more advanced on this topic. And so if we go into which of these that have public registers actually have structured open data, we can just count them with the fingers of our hand. So there's a very big challenge ahead about having open structured data, and we believe that data users can be building your own structured data to be able to compare it with international sources or with other countries that do have data available to fight this transnational challenge of illicit financial flows or corruption, and all these problems that BO can help us solve. So I guess I'm now handing over to Steve, and he will walk us through the work that we've done on structured data and why it is important.
Great, thanks, Agus. So for a few people who've joined recently, just a few minutes in, my name's Stephen. I'm the head of technology for Open Ownership, and I lead a team of people who help countries and governments and company registrars and people in civil society to produce and use beneficial ownership data. So what I'm going to be talking you through is some of the processes that go into creating that data, some of the things to bear in mind, some of the tools and the guidance that we've produced. And then we'll be talking and using some of those tools a little bit later on to show how you could go from having, say, information in a PDF to creating the kind of structured data that we advise people to create in the first place. So I will just go through this. Now, Open Ownership works with a large number of countries, and ultimately we work at all of the stages you can see here on this slide. So we help people with developing legislation. We help to look at how they have forms that can gather the data they want on beneficial ownership. And then my team helps to advise more on the systems they use to store and publish that information and how you can get the high quality data at the end. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that all of this needs to be unified and to be seen as in a bigger picture to help you get to the high quality beneficial ownership data that we want to help people produce at the end. If you don't have the legislation to back up people having to give you a certain ID or their names or their addresses that then allows you to identify them uniquely at the end, you're never going to have the kind of high quality data that we want to advise people to produce. So Open Ownership, we have a whole series of guidance and tools and everything that help people at every stage of this. We're not going to send you all the links today, but we're going to share this presentation with you afterwards, and all of the links to things about implementation or the technical side of this work will all be linked to there so that you can carry on and do more reading if you want to be on this workshop. Now, generally, what we see is that there is information sometimes published about beneficial ownership data, and more often than not, we see it published in PDFs, in annual reports. Companies are releasing some information about who owns them, who controls them, but they're not doing it in a way that allows that data to be easily used by others, to be combined across different jurisdictions, to be supplied perhaps to a different jurisdiction, because we know around the issues relating to beneficial ownership, there is an international element where in lots of cases, the chains of ownership that people are most interested in investigating and looking at go from country to country or jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So the work that we do is to try and move people from a position of having beneficial ownership information published in PDFs, as you can see here, where you can't really get insights and kind of information out of them very easily, into a situation where that information instead is collected in a structured way and can then be republished and reused at a later stage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through some of the ways that we recommend capturing that and some of the things you can then do at the end of that process if you do have this structured data. This is what we imagine as an idealized system for beneficial ownership in a particular country. So we imagine that if a country wanted to be really serious about publishing and releasing and helping people use really high quality beneficial ownership data, their whole system would look something like this. So on the left, you can see that laws have been put in place to gather certain beneficial ownership information. That information is either collected via an electronic form or perhaps paper forms, and then goes through a process to get it into a database in the same way that the electronic form would be there. And then that information, once stored, can then be offered in a variety of ways. As Agus was pointing out, more and more people are starting to offer public access to their data. It's still very early stages. There's still people who are charging for that access. There's still people who don't release their data, but international standards are pushing more and more towards publishing this data and having it openly available, making it good quality, up-to-date information that people can use and can be used for investigations and by government and by everyone. So at the data sharing stage, we imagine two things. So maybe countries and company registrars might want to offer that information via a public website so people can search, they can download the data. And also for analysts or developers, who might want to build software outside of it. They might offer access via an API or bulk data that people can download and reuse. That's something that we do in our team. We reuse data from other countries, and we try to show how we can put it all together in a tool we call the Open Ownership Register, which we'll be talking about in the second workshop of these that we're doing. Now, it's important to say that beneficial ownership information can be fairly complex. I'll explain what the kind of ways that we try to make it understandable and the ways that we recommend capturing it understandable. But it's worth saying that in a lot of cases, the data that's collected, you will want to be able to connect one person to multiple companies. You want to be able to connect a company to multiple people. There is information that appears and all you will want in a database about beneficial ownership that needs to be linked to each other in multiple ways. And so I can talk now a little bit about why we recommend doing that via use of a relational database rather than something that's more like tabular data. So tabular data, I'll show an example in a second, but would be more like there's one line in a table where you say, you know, what's this person's name, what's their birth date, what's their address, and all of this. The data that we're recommending capturing around beneficial ownership is complicated enough that we recommend collecting it in a relational database, which then makes it easier at the end, once you've got that data, to compare any of the fields that you want. So it allows you to do a lot more. For example, if you only wanted to look for beneficial owners from your register who are have a nationality of being from Argentina, where Agus is based, then you can do that in kind of useful ways, and you can kind of slice and query the data that's collected in as many ways as you like. So this is an example of how we explain this here. So explain the relational database being one that presents data as relations between entries, and it gives you the ability to connect any two pieces of information within that data so that you can do multiple things, and it kind of allows greater analysis later on. The terminology we use is talking about tables where information is held. So tables contain columns and rows as any other table does, but then each row contains a unique key. And what I'll show you later on, and what we're going to be doing in the tool that we'll use in the second half of the workshop, is actually show how we have created a spreadsheet that breaks down beneficial ownership data that we recommend capturing into a series of tables using Google spreadsheets, to show you an example of how you can create this data using multiple tables of information that all can then be pulled together at the end. So yeah, I've talked about that. So here's an example of what I mean about what we would imagine a beneficial ownership database to look like. This is provided in some guidance that again is on our website. It's linked to from this presentation, and we'll be sharing the presentation and all the links afterwards. So what you have here is you have the idea that most beneficial ownership information is submitted as part of a declaration. So often that is because a company once a year, perhaps in their annual filings, have to submit information to a company registrar or a business authority saying who their beneficial owners are. In some jurisdictions, that might be triggered in a different time frame. So in some countries, you see there's legislation where people say that if a change is made to beneficial ownership, you have to alert the authorities within perhaps 2 weeks or a month after that change has happened. But anyway, so information is submitted on a particular day that we would call a declaration. And in a second, I'm going to talk about the beneficial ownership data standard that we look after and that we develop, and how we recommend capture that information. But it's worth saying here that beneficial ownership information is made up of information about people who own and control entities. So companies, in some cases, those might be trusts or things other than companies. Generally, that would be companies. But it's people, how they own and control things, and which entities or which companies they own and control. So you can see here in the middle column, there's 3 types of statements. There's a person statement, which captures information about the person. There's a relationship statement, which captures information about the relationship between that person and the entity. and there's an entity statement which captures information about the entity or the company. And you'll see, I'll go through them in a second, but maybe the text is a little bit small for everyone to see, but there's a whole series of fields that we recommend capturing there, whether for people it's names and addresses, for the entities, again, it's names, registered addresses, whether they've got IDs, all these kind of things. But this is how we imagine the data being captured. And you can see there's lines between everything because every part of this data has connections to other parts and is all intertwined. But if you capture it in this kind of way, it makes it a lot easier to use, to reuse, and to present and make use of at later stages in multiple ways. This is the example of what isn't a relational database. So we see a lot of information. This is a live example. This is an example where my team at Open Ownership worked with Rio Tinto, who are a huge mining organization, to see how they could better release and structure the beneficial ownership information they have. Now you see they have this information. So you can see in column D here, Rio Tinto's percentage interest. They have very detailed information about the interest they hold. But by talking to them and taking them through this, they started to realize that the ways they were capturing this information got so complicated so quickly that a simple spreadsheet like this was not adequate. There are multiple ways that Rio Tinto is involved in multiple companies in multiple jurisdictions. Those companies are themselves intertwined in different ways. We just couldn't get to the point of having really good information that they could reuse and that they could share on. But this is a good example of how sometimes a lot of this information is out there. It is published. We see a huge number of examples where companies publish about beneficial ownership in their annual reports, especially if they're publicly listed. And so we offer some tools, which we'll be showing later, about taking this kind of information and turning it into the kind of high quality data that we recommend. Now, the beneficial ownership data standard. This is a standard that our team has developed over the last 5 years in partnership with a team called Open Data Services, who are data analysts and open data specialists. The data standard is an open standard that anyone can reuse. We're really happy to say that it's been adopted in several countries. So Latvia, Armenia, and Nigeria have all adopted it already. And we use it to map information or to map data from the UK, Slovakia, Ukraine, and Denmark. And we're in the process of working with a number of other jurisdictions where they're either adopting the standard and publishing their data using our standard, or where we're working with them and then they publish their information and we change it into the kind of data that we recommend. Now, just to quickly talk to you about what data standards are and why they're useful. And then after that, I'll go into the beneficial ownership data standard in particular. No, so data standards are something that kind of underpin a lot of work to structure data. So by offering a standard, especially an open standard, we're effectively developing a guide, a series of formats and technical information, and also written guidance, which is all available at standard.openownership.org, which allow people to structure and gather data in the same way, no matter where they are in the world, with an eye to being able to combine it across jurisdictions, to combine the data from different registers. So, for example, we do work in places like South Africa and the UK and other parts of the world which have multiple registers of beneficial ownership on trusts and companies, and they want to connect all that data. But the systems were developed completely separately. So our conversation with them is, well, if you use a data standard, then everyone is producing the data in the same way, and it allows it to be combined in an easier way. So the first point here is it's easiest to understand how the data is structured because there's the same guide that everyone can look at. The more structured it is, so the more standardized the data is, the easier it is to understand what's going on. So if someone comes across a field that talks about an address and says the address is a business address, what's meant by that, you can go to the documentation that we've produced that's just available openly on the website, and you can find out. The documentation, by the way, is available in English, Spanish, and Russian for anyone to use. And on the last point, the more open and adaptable a standard is, the more people can use it in different ways, and the more systems can be built to produce data in line with the standard. So our open standard has been used by developers in Latvia, Armenia, Nigeria, and other countries to produce beneficial ownership data. We take other people's data and map it in line with our data standard. We're currently doing work with companies who sell their software so that they can also incorporate it into their system, so that they can then go on to sell a product which they've put a lot of work into, but which structures the data in a way that they think will be really valuable to their customers. Because at the end, people get good quality data that's been structured in line with the best international standards that can also be shared with other people. So the more people standardize their data in the same way, the easier it is for people to understand it and to exchange it and to combine it. And so this is where we hope to get to with the beneficial ownership data standard. And we've released the latest version of our standard about 2 or 3 months ago, and we're continuing to do work on it. So it's an open standard that we work on, where all the information can be found via GitHub as we develop that. So in terms of beneficial ownership, we saw a whole series of issues that people had at the start. Lots of beneficial ownership data that's captured at the moment is held privately. It's sold by people from the likes of Moody's, Bureau van Dijk. There's companies that work to pull together beneficial ownership information, or they have particular contracts that they sign. But in a lot of those cases, it's not openly available for people to use. And our research at Open Ownership has found that to solve the problem that beneficial ownership transparency is trying to get to, which is that people don't know who owns and controls companies. And in order to understand that, you need to have good data, and you need to have good data that can follow that person and that chain of ownership wherever it leads in the world. That's the challenge. And so 5 or 6 years ago, we started the process of looking at all of the ways that people in the world gather beneficial ownership data, all of the types of examples of what they want to do with it, and try to pull together a common understanding in our data standard that allows people to share information in a certain way, which is international, so that you can combine it from different places, and also kind of promotes the things you can see here on the slide about having a common understanding and shared vision for why this information is important and how you can put it together. So the Beneficial Ownership Data Standard, or BODS, so BODS as we call it, is an open standard for collecting and publishing high quality beneficial ownership data. On the standard.openownership.org website, you'll find data scheme. So we're on version 0.3 of the standard at the moment. And if you go to that website, it'll take you automatically to that version. And you can also go back through the other ones if you want. You'll have a data scheme which explains every single one of the fields that we recommend collecting, how we recommend formatting the data in those fields, if they're, for example, date fields or identifier fields. We provide a lot of guidance on that in the schema that describes what information should be shared. It's worth saying that there's lots and lots of information we allow people to gather, but only certain fields which are marked are mandatory. So, you know, in order to identify a person, you have to have a name. And we also recommend having an identifier, but there's other fields and other things you can gather that are recommended in some places, but they're not mandatory. You can generate BODS data, as we call it, so data in line with our data standard, without having to have every single field to fill in. And there's also a whole series of technical guidance published on that website that looks at, for example, identifiers. So if you want to collect or use good quality identifiers on people, for example, like passport numbers or tax IDs, or just a unique identifier for that person, how you'd go about doing that. We also offer advice on company identifiers and other things that help to produce this better quality data. There's dedicated guidance on producing information on state-owned enterprises, how to model indirect beneficial ownership relationships, All of this is all kind of listed on the website. And again, so we'll be sharing this afterwards. So hopefully people can go and if they want to learn a bit more about all of that afterwards. To echo the point I was saying earlier on about what you want to collect when you need to understand beneficial ownership data. You need information on people, you need information on entities, or like we said here, like companies, trusts, and arrangements, and you need to understand how those people own or control those companies or those entities. So we've organized BODs around that idea, around the idea that you'll have a bundle of information, we call a statement over here about a person. You have a statement over here about an entity or a company or trust arrangement. And then you have some information about how that person, that entity are related, or what the ownership or control relationship is. Now, just to say, in most cases, beneficial ownership can be fairly straightforward. It can be this person owns or controls this company 100%. That's straightforward. You've got a person, you've got an entity, you've got an ownership or control stake. In more complicated cases, what we tend to see is that perhaps a company is owned by another company, which is owned by another company, which is owned by another company, which is ultimately owned by a person. And you can imagine that along that route, there are many people who could potentially be linked to. There are also many companies, as we've said, but in the end, all of the information boils down to entities, people, and the ownership or control between them. So in the example I just gave, you would have a company where it would say that the company is owned or controlled in a way by this other company. That company is owned or controlled in this way by another company. That company is owned or controlled by this person. And what we're hoping to do with beneficial ownership data is always be able to link to get back to that person, or the beneficial owner, the ultimate beneficial owner, some UBO that some people, the phrase some people use. So that's the aim. The aim is that a beneficial owner in our understanding and in most understandings of beneficial ownership around the world needs to be a person, needs to be a natural person. You need to get back to an individual. In some cases, you will see examples in beneficial ownership data where you can only find out that a company owns or controls a company. Now, we would argue you need more information. You need to go further. You need to go higher up that chain to understand. And we can see, and I'm sure everyone in every country that you're coming from has seen a series of stories over the last 10 years, which are all about this challenge, how you can take what's happening with a company in one country and connect it back through data from other countries to ultimately back to the person who is often trying to hide the fact that they own or control the company in question. But all of that can be done if you have these statements or the gathering of data about people, about entities, and about how those people own or control those entities. This is an example looking at each one of those statements, like the types of things that I was just laying out, recommending what fields we have in BODs, in the data standard, that we recommend collecting. So this again is a whole list. And when you go to our data standard documentation site, it explains what we mean in each case. So for example, date of birth, what standard format we would recommend for capturing that and doing it. So for all different dates, people can have multiple nationalities, they can have multiple tax residencies. It's really important to be able to capture that. For people, there's PEP. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with this, but PEP is a politically exposed person. So in many jurisdictions, many places that implement, for example, the EITI or other anti-corruption efforts, they want to be able to identify whether a person is a politician or politically exposed, and that's what having a PEP status means. You are a politically exposed person, and you can capture that through our data standards. For the entities in the middle, you can see that we've talked about this earlier, but things like names and identifiers for companies and also addresses are often very, very useful in order to be able to uniquely identify that company to make sure you're talking about the right company. And in terms of ownership or control, what we advise people to gather is the subject. So what is being owned or controlled? Interested party, who is it being owned or controlled by? And then the interest is what interest do they have? What ownership or control interest they have? Do they have 50% of shareholdings? Do they have 75% of the voting rights? Are they a beneficiary of a trust, etc., etc.? That can all be captured in what we call interest, and what are the detail, the exact information about how those people own or control those entities. Again, we'll come back to this. So we've now gone through this kind of process of explaining all the kind of information. So I just wanted to repeat this kind of diagram here. So we imagine what happens with beneficial ownership data in the best possible scenario is that some information is submitted at a particular time about people, how they own or control things, and what they own or control. So in the entity statement, what they own or control. And that can then be gathered and stored in a way that people can then reuse that data by saying that they want to be able to search for a person's name and learn all of the entities they're connected to, be able to see how they are connected to those entities, and also to be able to understand this kind of complicated. This example here is fairly straightforward, but once you start to connect multiple statements to other statements, let's say this person in the person statement has some kind of beneficial ownership interest in 10 companies, you can see how there's a kind of exponential growth in the amount of information that you need to be able to connect about this. And this is why having better, higher quality structured data can be really beneficial when you want to do all the kind of things that people want to do with beneficial ownership data. Now, just a really quick promotion for our work. We're talking about some things today, and we really hope that you'll join us for all of the workshops that we're running with open ownership. This is the first of 3 workshops that we're running over the coming month and a half. And we will be introducing you today to what's called the BODS data generator, and that allows you to create your own BODS data. We will be connecting it with a tool that allows you to check data. So that's what we call the data review tool. So any BODS data that's published anywhere can be put into our free open source data review tool to check if there's any issues with it, and to find out if there's information that's been put in the wrong place, or if fields are kind of mismatched, and things that need to be done to solve that. And just to say, if you go to our website, you'll find out more about what can be done with larger data sets and with more information once lots more data is structured in line with our data standard and with these kind of tools. So at the bottom, we talk about analyzing the data and connecting it with other sources. You can find out a lot more about that either by joining us for our later workshops or by going to the Open Ownership website and reading more about the work that we do. So I think now we said we were going to accept any questions. I will stop talking for a second. I guess I'm not sure if there's been any questions in the chat. If you have any questions that we could talk about now, if you want to raise your hand, and we'd be happy to unmute you and to hear what your question is. We'll give everyone a minute or two to have a think about it.
Yes, there haven't been any questions on the chat, but it's important that you all understand what a relational database is and the 3 main components that Stephen mentioned: the person or the people, the entity, and the relationship between them, because that's what we're going to be working on in the exercise right now. So if you have any questions, you want to clarify something or share an example of something that you struggled with, please do raise your hand now. Catherine, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much, Stephen. I just want to know if this kind of data standard should be used by the governments that are currently implementing bio registries, or this is just for the people that is interested in analyzing the data. because right now, for example, in countries like Colombia, the BO registry is already set, and we really don't know how we can access to the information, and they are still trying to understand how to connect different entities into the government to understand the information. So I want to know if we can advise them on how to use the information with this standard, or this is just for external people like civil society organizations that want to understand the data.
Great question. Thank you, Catherine. The data standards has very specifically been designed to be used by company registrars and by governments themselves. So our main focus is on providing it to governments so they can publish all of their data in line with the standards. So today we'll be talking about tools that civil society groups and people who are interested in learning more about this data can use to structure information that's already out there. But the main focus for our work and how we've been learning about it has been working directly with government. So absolutely, if Colombia wanted to do it, they could. And it's worth saying that the UK government has officially endorsed BODS as the official UK government open standard for beneficial ownership data, which we found to be really useful in conversations that we're having now with Canada, that we'll look to have with countries like Kenya and South Africa. So we're recommending this in lots of places. I can hand over to Agus, knows a lot more about the Latin American context than I do. But absolutely, it's something that governments can use. It's being recommended right now for the Americans to use, for the Canadians to use, for New Zealand to use, for lots of places. The more countries who adopt it, the easier they will find it to connect their data from multiple jurisdictions. Agus, do you want to say anything on the Latin American front?
There's not much to say, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, in Latin America, we've seen, as you saw in the map, there are some registries that are closed that are being developed either by tax authorities like the Colombian one or by financial intelligence units. And we haven't had much conversations about the development through bots, but ideally through the program, through this opening extractive program that I mentioned, we're working with the governments of Argentina, Ecuador, and Chile. And there are some promising conversations, but nothing yet. Tamika. Oh, yeah.
Hello, and thank you for that interesting presentation. I have two questions from your presentation. The first is a little bit out of curiosity. So I'm in Zambia, and we do have provision for the disclosing of beneficial ownership information. Although we don't have a public register, you need to pay to access that information. But one thing from our register that is missing that the EITI has noted and civil society has noted is the PEP status, politically exposed persons. So for registers, BO registers that have that, is it just a simple yes or no to the PEP status, or it actually explains the relationship? And that was just out of curiosity. And then my other question is around some of the issues that we find with larger corporations who, when asked for the beneficial information, will just indicate that they're listed on, for instance, the London Stock Exchange, right? And so for civil society, like, then what do you do? Do you go and request that information? Is it publicly available in the UK? So I think that has been one of the limitations when we're trying to do some sort of analysis for large mining companies, because they will say, we don't have a BO register because we are publicly listed on this international stock exchange. And sometimes the conversation ends there and we're not sure where to go. So I think some help and advice and guidance would help in terms of how we then move forward. Thank you.
Absolutely. So yeah, really good questions. And so PEPs and PLCs, so public listed companies, are two things that we can deal with in the beneficial ownership data stand. So in terms of PEPs, actually, when you go to look at the person statement, you capture where yes or no, are they a PEP, but then also when do they become a PEP? You can capture details. So, give their job title, provide some information, say when they became a PEP, when they stopped being a PEP, if, for example, they are elected to be an MP for a certain period of time. If people then want to connect that to other data sets, we recommend not doing that in BODS itself. We can't do that right now. So, for example, if they are connected with their brothers, sisters, family, wife, husband, we can't capture all of that information about their family connections, but what we can do is allow you to say this person with this name, with these identifiers, with these addresses is a politically exposed person because of this job title between these dates, and you can capture that information. And we would recommend then probably the government having a separate data set that they might need to capture about PEPs and about their connections and associates. On public listed companies, this is something we produced guidance about this about 2 years ago, and we've worked it into our standards. So what we argue is that in order to understand ownership chains, like I said, wherever they go all across the world, you'll often come across companies that are public listed, and in a lot of cases, they're exempt from publishing their beneficial ownership data because of the jurisdiction's rules and because of the stock exchange being there. So what we've allowed is that for that entity in BODS, we have a new thing called the public listing object, where you can say this company is public listed, therefore it doesn't have some of the other information that's declared like on beneficial ownership, but you can see it's here, you can see its name, you can see when it was founded, and you can put it into a chain. And also we advise on how you can capture the information about which stock exchange it's on, what the securities information is, what the stock market ticker is, so that if you come across that in beneficial ownership data, you can point off to where people should be able to find more information. So yeah, we argue that you should capture some information about the company, even if that information is just to say, go over here where there might be more information published. Agus, do you want to, because Zambia is an OE country, do we want to say anything about what we're doing with Zambia at the moment?
Yes, so we're working with them to improve the forms in which the companies register and share the BO information. Unfortunately, not yet to go to BODS or to any data standard, and we're still discussing the payment issue, if there's a way to get the access free of charge. But for now, we're mainly focusing on increasing the capacity of the teams because they have very limited capacity, and then working with the mining cadastre to use beneficial ownership data for their mining screening process for awarding licenses. And so, but again, not yet on the standard itself, but ideally through the forms review and improving the forms, more data and more structured data can be captured that in the midterm leads to more structured BO data.
I guess there's a couple of questions in the chat. One's from Fatima, says, hi from Nigeria. Will other information about the persons be there, especially for persons who have common names? So in terms of people who might have the same names, Fatima, we would recommend obviously capturing an ID number for them. That can either be one that's kind of anonymous, that's created by the system itself. So for Nigeria, that would be the Corporate Affairs Commission and CAC, who we're working with. The CAC has actually adopted the beneficial ownership data standard. So if you keep an eye out in coming months, we hope to have some announcements to make on that front, because all the data that's being put into their register is being captured in line with that. And the second question is from Cooper in Liberia, which is another open extractive country. So welcome, thank you for coming. Is there any known disadvantages for the use of open standard? What BO data is available in the open standard, and are there any limits to what should be available? So in all cases, what we do with the standard is we offer a guide for how you could capture as much information as you want to, or as little information as you want to. That standard can either be used to produce public data that can be published and made available openly, or it could be used to collect data privately that's only kept within the government. So what the purpose of it is just that if everyone is collecting the data in the same way, whether you want to exchange that across government agencies, or you want to publish it and you want to exchange it from different governments all over the world, it becomes easier if you have if you have that. I mean, a known disadvantage for an open standard is that we don't sell our product. So for the disadvantage for us is that we think there's so much more value in having it openly, but I could say, you know, we could make a lot more money if we tried to sell this privately. There are some other kind of we're one of the only standards out there that is available that can be used by anyone. Basically, there's lots of places that sell products, or they pull together data from multiple sources where they have a model, a way that they gather the data. But if you don't want to pay money, a large amount of money to access that information, then we think that there's lots more benefits from open standard. In terms of what data is available, it depends what the countries publish themselves and how they license it. We advise a policy of data minimization, so only publish or collect as much information as you need to achieve the policy aims that you've got. So you don't need to go gathering information about people's email addresses and phone numbers if you don't need that, and lots of other things. And yeah, there's absolutely limits to what should be available. Yes, it depends on the legislation in different countries. I know, for example, Liberia is keen on revising their legislation, and some colleagues from my team will be working on that in the coming 2 months. But every country is different. So what our standard tries to allow people to do is to collect what information you want to, and then it can be combined in different ways from different countries. But you don't have to use all the fields, like I said.
Before going to the question on the chat, I think, Frank, you had your hand raised and I don't see it now. Do you want to mention something?
Yeah, hello. Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I think my question was somewhat in line with what Tamika was asking, and it was around the area of the relational database. And I just wanted to find out that actually I'm from Ghana, but currently in Sweden. Sometimes it's difficult to find personal information from some of the companies, because sometimes you find out some of them are more of like a consortium and also owned by countries. So I just wanted to find out how, yes, to go about that when you're dealing with the relational database. Yeah. Thank you.
So just to expand on what I was saying earlier on, so capturing data on state-owned enterprises, and also on, so those that are owned or controlled by a state or by state bodies or government agencies and government departments, as well as public listed companies, were updates that we did in the standard when we released the last version in June. And so again, there's information that we can share on those, and we've got detailed guidance on what to do. But generally, through opening extractors, we work in a lot of EITI countries. If countries need to abide by the EITI standard, they need to produce information in line with requirements 2.5 and 2.6 of the standard. So 2.5 is on beneficial ownership, 2.6 is on state participation. We'll be producing dedicated guidance on this in about 2 months' time. We'll have a full publication that looks into it. But yes, so we argue that the ways that state-owned enterprises and public listed companies are owned and controlled is important to capture, and a lot of beneficial ownership regimes currently don't accurately and comprehensively capture them. And so if they appear in wider ownership chains, you're not going to be able to understand proper networks of activity unless you can capture information on them in some way. And so what we've done there is we've added the ability to capture information about state bodies and about states in the beneficial ownership data standard. And we've also expanded what you can capture on an entity like a company to say, this is publicly listed and here's where it's publicly listed. Then it kind of depends on the disclosures that are made in that stock exchange. Hope that answers your question. There's a question from Elma. I think if we take Elma's question and then Daniel, as a final question, then we'll move on to our exercise. So Elma, so we, Open Ownership started off as a project within Open Corporates, actually. So we started off as a pilot working with them. So Open Corporates has data on about 200 million companies. That is company data. So they have information on the registration details, the foundations, all of the addresses and everything on companies, but not necessarily the beneficial ownership, not necessarily the owners. They'll have a lot on the kind of legal ownership and the company registration details. And they're a fantastic site. We use Open Corporates data really heavily in our work. So whenever you look up a company on our Open Ownership Register, you will be able to see the Open Corporates ID to help you connect from our data to their data. So yeah, they have about they have company registration details on about 200 million companies. We have currently got beneficial ownership data on about 9 million companies, which is from the UK, Slovakia, Denmark, and Ukraine. We'll be adding more to that. So we hope to be up to about 11 or 12 million companies by next March. And more countries hopefully will be producing this data. So in that case, you can look up the company and then you can find out who the beneficial owners are in all those cases. So they publish, so we publish information on who owns and controls companies. They publish all the information about what companies are, where they are, how they're based, how they're incorporated, and they're a fantastic resource that, and people we talk to a lot. Daniel, I'll just ask you to unmute, and then so this would be, I think, last question for now, and then we'll move on to the exercise.
Hello. Thank you for the chance to talk. My question is more about not really about the standard, but how we move from having the data structure and so on, and moving to use it. Are there like any examples worldwide where it's not only the available data there, but it's actually being used for something, not just like a nice database where you can have an interface where you can actually look for specific companies or so on, because well that would be very useful, for instance, for the journalists. But I mean, in terms of a whole application or a system that that can visualize these kind of relationships between the owners of the companies and so on, because I think at some point, I'm from Mexico, it can happen something like the open contracting standard, that it's been there for a while, and there's some data from the government and so on, but it's not really used because I think some people don't see the potential of the data in terms of how can it be used. So there are some efforts, like for instance, in terms of trying to regulate buyings from the government using the open contracting standard. But I think that if you can give us some examples, it would be great, in order to visualize how can all these be in the future used in many ways. Thank you.
Agus, do you want me to talk, or do you want to talk back?
You can start, and then I can add a couple of thoughts.
Okay. So Daniel, I mean, so what we offer, at least, is that we offer the Open Ownership Register. So that pulls together data from 4 countries, which you can then search, visualize the data as it crosses across all of those places, and also download the information if you want to use it yourself. We're working with people who are reusing that information. So we're working with the likes of teams like Open Sanctions to combine it with sanctions data and make it all visualized. We work really closely with the Open Contracting team, because the Open Contracting standard and the beneficial ownership data standard are aligned, so that if you know which companies are taking part in public procurement via Open Contracting data, you can find out who owns and controls them using our data standard. I mean, there are examples where I know Open Contracting data in Latin America is being used by Microsoft for a series of projects so they can try and do there to look into corruption. But I agree in general, there needs to be more use of this data. we're still at the stage where a lot of it hasn't been published for a long time. There's lots of really interesting examples from the UK and from other places that we've got listed on our website. We're supporting a whole number of projects in a range of countries that are part of Open Extractives to help them do that. Agus, I think we just published a blog post on the website actually a few days ago about this, didn't we? Some of the examples of projects that we're supporting.
Yes, I think there's a mix of where there is data available and where there isn't. We're seeing lots of investigative projects and people that are digging into companies' registration information or leaks or informants that are using data are kind of looking into companies' ownership and digging into the powerful, and though that's kind of one angle, but then from registries themselves and where there is public available information, I agree with Steve that there is lots to be done, but we've seen some emerging cases in which either the lack of available data triggered unwanted results, either mining licenses badly awarded or conflicts of interest or contracts being public contracts being granted to family members of the public procurement agents, so lots of conflicts of interest. We've seen investigations in which they combine a leak with a public registry. For instance, in Argentina, there was an OCCRP investigation in which they combined the Luxembourg public registry to find out links to companies that were owned locally by our former president, and there was kind of some conflicts of interest and potential corruption in the acquisition of eolic parks. So I think there's very small cases of investigations rather than fancy platforms or red flags websites that are also very useful, but I think it's one by one investigations. We have a couple of examples on how this has been used. For instance, in Slovakia, and we have a very nice impact story published about this, how the registry has been used with the former MP being involved again in a corruption case. So I think we need to see more, and this should be more widely spread, but the limited availability of free available data or the low compliance of companies sometimes, it's also a blocker for this. In Ghana, we are supporting 4 journalists investigating this and using the website, and with there some info published, but they were really struggling because when they get the printouts of the companies, the data is not completed, it's empty. So there's lots to be done as well with the enforcement of the declarations and actually having companies submitting this and complying with the law. But yeah, let's move over to the next phase, Steve.
Okay, thank you all so much for all of those questions. Hopefully when we share some more of the documents, especially things like that were asked about to do with public listed companies or state and enterprises, hopefully some of the things on our website can help with some more information about that, but we're obviously happy beyond this call to answer to answer your questions. So I'm going to now move on to an example talking about the BODS. So remember, it's the Beneficial Ownership Data Standard, or BODS data generator. So this is what I'm going to maybe make the foolish decision to do a live demo for all of you of a tool where I'm going to be creating a spreadsheet to show you a tool that we have on our website that anyone can take and reuse, that allows you to pull information if you can see it from documents out on the internet or that are published by people, and to structure them in line with BODS. So I'll just talk really quickly about the work, and then I will switch over so that I can do that. And what we're going to try and do is I'm going to try and do it quickly, and then I'll share it with all of you and ask you to have a go while we're on the call. And then we're going to have some homework so that people can take things away and practice. So we are going to use the data. We're going to imagine that Agus and I have decided to set up a business together called Honest Business Limited. and that we're going to be both be 50% shareholders of that company, and that we want to show how that information can be collected in line with version 0.3, which is the latest version of the beneficial ownership data standard. So if I just stop sharing that for a second, and I will instead move to my other tab. It's over here. So 1 second. So hopefully you should all be able to see a page now that says the beneficial ownership data standard data generator. I will share that link quickly in the chat if people want to go to that, and I'll explain what it is that we're talking about here. So in order to show people how best to gather the data, we think it's valuable to have tools that allow people to collect the data as BODs, and also to then check it using our data review tool, and then to visualize it using visualization system. We haven't really mentioned much today. We'll talk more about that in our next workshop. But what that does is, once you have data produced in line with BODs, you can literally take the data, put it into our visualizer, and it will draw you a diagram of the data that you've just entered. So from this data generator page, we have a link here that says external link. And if you click on that, what you'll get to is you will get to a screen like this. So this is the data generator spreadsheet. And there's, on the first tab of the spreadsheet, there's a whole series of guidance about how to fill it in and what it does. And you'll see there's a whole number of tabs along the bottom, all in different colors, that set out all the information that you need to be able to put in. Now I'm going to attempt, and I hope this is going to work, but to do all of this really quickly in about 10 or 15 minutes to explain to you how this tool works and how it links with what we've been talking about with BODs earlier on. So in general, remember what we said earlier, you need information about people, you need information about entities, you need information about ownership or control. So if you go along these tabs, you can see there's some ones called people, there's some ones called entities, and there's some ones called ownership, control, main. So if we go through them all, what you have to do when you create a copy of this spreadsheet is, the first thing to do is, once you've got your URL of your copy, you drop it in where it says paste URL here, and that will then make things work a bit later on. You can also see there's some checks, so it'll tell me once I filled in the spreadsheet if I filled everything in properly. Publication information. So if I wanted to say that I was the publisher, I can go in here. The publication date today is the 6th of October. So I'm going to go to say 6th of October. There we go. And it's BODs version 0.3. We're doing research. So I've published all that information. Now, in terms of people, what I want to do is I want to say that today I am making a statement. Some of these fields you need to look at BODs a little bit to understand, but its component is basically, is this statement part of a larger beneficial ownership chain? So is it more complicated? Does it need to be positioned as part of a whole chain? So I'm going to say falsehood, which is very straightforward. Known person. So I'm going to say that the first known person is Agostina. And you can see that it's now generated a statement ID for me automatically over on the side. I can say nationality, and we've got a drop-down list here. So Agus is from Argentina. Recommended birthday. Agus, I don't know when your birthday is. I'm going to...
It's the 1st of March of 1991.
Okay, fantastic. So put that in, and then some of the other fields, let's say Argentina again, some of them you can see you don't have to fill them in, but there's all sorts of options about places of residence and details you can get. But that's enough to say that we know who Agus is. So I also put the same kinds of information for myself. So say it's a known person. In some cases, you might have to identify people and say they are anonymous, because you might know there's a beneficial ownership arrangement there, but you might not know exactly yeah, you might not know who it is. So you might want to declare that someone is a 20% owner, but you don't have all their details. I'm not as young as Agus. I just had my 41st birthday. So I'm going to put that in there. And I was born in the UK, so I'll put that in there, but I live in Zimbabwe. So I can put those in there. If you want to fill in, you can fill in more information if you want. But now what we have is we have two person statements. So we have information about two people. In terms of an entity, we want to say again, today's date. Sorry, hopefully I can do this quick enough that it's not going to be boring for you all to watch. So we can say that we've got a registered company, and we talked about it being called Honest Business Limited. In the jurisdiction, so let's say, for example, you know, we work a lot in the UK. Let's say that this is a UK company. And identifier. So this would normally be a company number or something that would be really clear to make sure we could identify that company originally. So I will just put in a made up identifier for now. The scheme code is basically which jurisdiction or which places it published from. So in the UK, Companies House published the information, and I happen to know that their code is GB for Great Britain and Companies House, so COH. So we filled in.
Sorry, Steve, may I
Yep.
ask you something? If people from other countries wanted to know what's the ID for the entity that publishes the information, the scheme code, is there any public website where they can look for these, or they make it up, or is?
Yeah, there is. So if you go to the our data standard, we recommend a thing called Org ID, and Org ID is a site which you can search for any country. And it gives you the details. So hopefully you can all see the website right now. So for example, if I look for the United Kingdom, you can see there's a whole series of identifiers listed on there. So I'm talking about Companies House. If you wanted to look for any other country, so I know we had some examples from Zambia earlier on. So if you want to see identifiers from Zambia, perhaps from PACRA, so the Patents and Company Registration Agency in Zambia. So that would be ZM PCR. This is a public website anyone can use that gives kind of examples of identifiers that so people can go and use that if they want to. So I've now created a very basic entity statement like we talked about. So we need people, entities, and now we need to decide how those people own or control those entities. So again, we're going to say that the information was put in today is component. Again, sorry, that's false. And the entity that is subject to this is Honest Business Limited. The interested person is Agus, and I'll put myself under here so I can fill all these fields in again, and do that and have that in there. And you can see that when we get a bit further along, we can say interest levels. So we said that what we were going to be, we'll both be direct 50% shareholders. Now I'm going to talk about this example I'm giving right now is going to be fairly straightforward, just so we can do it quite quickly and introduce you to the tool. There are obviously ways you can create more complicated data. So we've got another example already made up of a more complicated structure to show you. So I'm going to say in this case that both of us are, we're direct shareholders. So we have direct shareholding. It is beneficial ownership because in the UK, if you're more than a 25% shareholder, you are a beneficial owner. Therefore, beneficial ownership or control is true because we are both beneficial owners. And the interest details, what we allow people to do here via all these things here, you can see interest details, exact share value and everything like that. Those allow you to capture either the exact amount that we own or control, or you can put in a range. So for example, if you know that it's somewhere between 25% and 50%, which is what the usual case is in the UK, then you could put a minimum share of 25, a maximum share of 50. But in this case, I'll just say that we've both got 50% shareholding, and you can see that some of the other information, like the statement on days and everything, is pulled over automatically. Now, once you've done that, that's as quick as you can do it, and you come back to here. Oh, look, all the things are green. So on the second page, where you go to the upload tab, everything is green. I put the URL into the paste URL here box earlier on. Now, again, just to mention, all of this works on Google Spreadsheets. So I just wanted to say that this can't be used in Excel, unfortunately. Yeah, there's a option in the second thing where you can download it to be in Excel, but some of the things that we do in this spreadsheet only currently work in Google Spreadsheets. But we have a link to the data review tool. So when you dropped in the URL for your spreadsheet in the in the first box there, it automatically updated this one to provide a link to what we call our data review tool. So if I click onto that, it'll go over to the data review tool, and now the spreadsheet that I just created for Honest Business Limited is being submitted to our data review tool. Oh dear. classic thing to try and do a live experiment. Why is that saying something's wrong? Let me show you. So I made up an example earlier on just in case something went wrong, because I want to keep things moving. So if I'll try this again on here, and if I click to go to the page, I hope this one would work. Okay, brilliant. So the information that I created has been sent to what's called the BODS data review tool, and it says to me there's a few things that we can update. So there's a few things that I put in that to show you how you can get like these additional checks. But basically we've got an identifiers. So we've got an issue where I put in a business address where I should put a person's address because I added a person. But you can see that we have BODS information, and down here we've got 2 people who have direct interests. And once you put the information into this tool, you can download it as an Excel spreadsheet, or you can download it as JSON. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on the JSON file there, and hopefully all of you can see this. This is the data. This is the BODS data that I've just created. So this is what JSON data looks like when it's created in line with BODS. So you can see, I'll go to this view so it explains a little bit more. You can see we've got the information about Agus in here, saying that nationality is Argentinian, birth dates, place of birth, all this information there. We've got information about the address of the business. We've got information about me. We've got all the kind of identifiers and information that you need to say that these 2 people own or control this company. Now, because I've got this information here, I can now save it. So I'll save it as a JSON file, and I will now open up, and we'll provide you with the link for this. But with I will open up the visualization tool. So on our website, we have a visualization tool, which we'll share the link to, where it allows you to upload any BODS data you find anywhere. So you can get it from the Open Ownership Register, you can create it yourself. And again, this is an open source library to visualize BODS data that is available for anyone to reuse. It's already being reused by the government of Armenia, so that they can visualize their beneficial ownership information because they collect it in line with our data standard. It's also being used by other software companies and people who develop information. But we have a hosted version on our site. So I'm going to choose the JSON file that I just created. I'm going to click import. You can also copy and paste all the data in here if you want. And here we go. So I now have, I'm hoping that everyone can see this really clearly. We now have a BODS diagram. So we have created the data about 2 people who each have a 50% shareholding in Honest Business Limited. So that's, we could have done it with 1 person, but it's almost as simple as you can get in kind of beneficial ownership terms. You can see in each one of those cases that because we've said I'm from the UK and because Agus is from Argentina, that the country flags appear there. Wherever possible, the arrows that go between the people and the entities will contain information about what the interest is. So in this case, it says owns 50%, but if it was voting rights or if it was something different, then it tells you on the line that there is this relationship. And you can also see that the company has, it's in the UK, therefore has the UK flag. So that's a quick demonstration of how you can go about creating this data. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to, I'll move back to my presentation. And we wanted to give you a task to do in the last little in the time that we've got left, that will hopefully lead nicely into the homework that we've set, which is to go off and learn more about BODS data by using it. So you see back in presentation now, and so the work that we wanted to ask you to do is we will hopefully Agus can grab this now. We'll drop a link to the data generator into the chat, and we can also give you the example spreadsheet 1, which shows what I created. So please, if you can make a copy of that one, then what you can do is on your side, you can try and do the tasks that we've set here. So we want to get you used to kind of looking around through the different tables of information that are gathered there. So the 3 tasks we want to see if you want to try and do is just to go find Agostina's name and change it to your name. So make sure you've gone into the right places and changed your name. You can change the nationality and change it over to your country. Perhaps if you want to look up a different ID or for a company, if you wanted to, you can put in real company IDs. And also if you find the interest level, so basically we're talking about making changes on a couple of the tabs. If you go to find those, let's see if we can get everyone making a copy of the spreadsheets. Remember to make a copy so we're not all editing in one sheet, and see if you can do those tests. So I'll make sure to keep these tests up on the screen. Yeah, and then we'll give everyone, I think we're giving everyone about 10 minutes to try and do these. So 20 to the hour, we will come back and we will see if anyone's had any problems. If anyone's got any questions, please do let us know while you're doing the experiment on your side. Please let us know if you have any questions or if there's anything we can help to clarify.
Just to if you have never made a copy in spreadsheets, when you're enter to the link that I pasted on the chat, you will see the file button at the top left, and if you click that drop down list, the 4th option is make a copy, and so there you will get a pop-up to store that version in your computer, in your drive, and that will create a copy that you can work on and edit, so that yeah, you can work on that. And then another thing that I wanted to mention is that the data review tool and the small visualization that Steve mentioned is to show you how you can use this structured information. We will have more time and you will be testing that yourself in the upcoming workshops. We just wanted to show you now what it's possible and to use the visualizer for stories or to test the data, but don't worry if you didn't get that part because it was fast. We will work on that in the upcoming ones. Are there any questions? Is someone having problems in creating copies? We'll give it 5 minutes until almost 38 past of the hour wherever you're based, and then we'll reconvene to share.
Hope everyone's getting on okay. Do let us know if you have any issues or questions or yeah. So there's a question from Fatima saying, how do we submit? Fatima, have you done all the tasks you want to? We can let you show off the work you've done if you want to share your spreadsheet with us. Let me see if we can. Where's Fatima? I was just trying to. I'm just trying to ask you to.
Hi, Rima. You're asking if you're supposed to go to all the spreadsheets. The idea for now was just to work on the very 3 small tasks that were on the slide deck. That now we will reshare the screen. Just changing your name, the nationality, and the share percentage. But is there any volunteer that has completed the 3 that wants to share your screen and share with others how you did it? Did anyone had a problem in working with that? It was very simple, straightforward.
Fatima says it's pretty straightforward.
Does anyone wants to share your screen before we move to the more complex exercise or example at least?
Fatima just said in the chat that she'd be happy to share. I'm just trying to find how I can ask her
to make co-host.
Fatima, you should be able to start your video now, I think. Seeing if I can ask you to unmute.
Hi.
Hey.
Okay, I think
thank you for volunteering.
sharing is not okay. The screen sharing is not it's disabled. I think let me try again. Okay, I think it's let's see. I'm sharing now. I don't know if it's.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so I just like the task said, I changed Augustina's name to my name, and then changed the nationality to my nationality, and I think that was it. And then the next task now asks us to change interest to 75% and 25% for myself and for Stephen. So I did that.
Yep.
So I did change interest, share exact
Great.
75 to 85. So
great, brilliant.
that's it.
Yeah, so that's just a simple thing. So now if you were to go back and if you've made sure to put the URL for your spreadsheet in that second tab in the upload box. So if you go back to the upload tab and you want to just pick the URL at the top for your copy of example 1.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if you drop that into the exactly into that one there with the first yellow box or the one just above it. Yeah, exactly. And you'll see when you do it, oh, you just need to replace the one that's there. I think it might have gone at the end, unfortunately. Brilliant. And now you see that the two underneath it will have updated. So if you click on the data review URL, that one. Yeah, and then click on that URL. You can now see that, so that it's taking your spreadsheet, so your copy of the spreadsheet with the different information going off to our data review tool. Oh no, this is what happens when we do, low exposure. Sorry about that. But yeah, very well done. That's exactly what we meant to do. So to look across the different tabs, we need to check if there's something that's gone wrong with the process. Normally this all works. It's classic whenever we're trying to showcase things. But thank you very much for volunteering.
All right, thank you so much, Steve. Thank you.
So I think what we wanted to do now is to move on to a more complicated example. That's right, I guess, isn't it? I'm going to move on to example 2. Yeah. So we've gone through a simple example. And what I want to do now is I will share my screen again and take you through example 2 that we've built already, just to save time a little bit here. So this is using exactly the same spreadsheet template, but we want to get to a point where we have something going on. So we want to have an example where we showcase that there might be some more people behind Honest Business Limited that you might want to find out about. So the way we've done that is by adding more information on top of what we had before. So I'll take you through the fact that we have someone that I've called Crookie McCrook, or Crook McCrook, sorry, who's based in the British Virgin Islands. And we also have an anonymous person. So it's interesting here. So we had, before we had known people. So those are people where we have their name, we have their birth date, we have their ID number, and we have Crook McCrook's known details, but we don't know this other kind of anonymous beneficial owner. So maybe it would be interesting to know more about them. And Crook McCrook comes from France, but lives in Switzerland. You know, there's interesting information that's slightly different about this person. We've also got a new company. So we've created a new entity in here called Secret Ownership Limited that's in the British Virgin Islands. Now, normally, I would say what happens with examples like the one that we're showcasing is that you wouldn't actually have this information. So what we're talking about would be information that would be hidden. But my point is I'm going to try and show you why it's important that we know that, and why that kind of having these chains gives you more information and you can get a better picture of what's going on. We'll go over into the ownership or control statements. And so what we have now is we've changed. So actually, instead of being shareholders, Agus and I have voting rights in Honest Business Limited. So it looks like we control the business, but we don't own the business. Whereas what we have further down is actually the new shareholders. So these other people, Crook McCrook and this anonymous person, own the company via another company. So we've done that in the same way that we did with things before. So we've created the people. So we know there's 4 people now. We've created the entities. So we know that there's 2 types. There's 2 entities. There's Honest Business Limited and Secret Ownership Limited. And then we've put in the connections between all of those people. So in this case, we're saying that Honest Business Limited is connected to Agus in the interest way that's over here. So voting rights. Honest Business Limited is connected to me, voting rights again. Secret Ownership Limited is 80%. There's 80% of the shares are owned by Crook McCrook. Secret Ownership Limited holds the shares of. So if you, hopefully you can follow my follow the things I'm looking at. So I'm looking at row 11 here. Secret Ownership have some shares in us, and also Crook McCrook via Secret Ownership has an indirect shareholding in us. So all of that put together gets you a kind of a slightly more complicated picture, but the ways that you can use that information is exactly the same.
Sorry,
So
Steve,
yeah.
Can I ask you something before you move forward?
Yeah.
If you go back to the spreadsheet, to the ownership and control.
Yeah.
Secret ownership, so column F. In the,
Yeah.
the interested party, secret ownership, does that mean that secret ownership owns Honest Business Ltd or the other way around?
Yeah, so the subject entity is the one which is owned or controlled, and then the interested entity or interested person is the person or the entity doing the owning or the controlling. So in this case, it's saying, yeah. So in this case, it's saying that Honest Business Limited, there's some kind of ownership or control that's exerted by Secret Ownership Limited. And so if you go over to the interest, you can see that that is a 30% shareholding. And so you either have an interested entity, so a company, or an interested person. So like what we said earlier on, we're always trying to get this data to link back to the person. But in some cases, what you'll know is you'll say this business is owned or controlled by this company, and then you'll have to follow the information. So look at that company and see who they are owned or controlled by to be able to link it all together. Oh, this one worked. Okay, sorry. I'm worried now that some of these aren't going to work properly. But you can see that this information has gone off into our data review tool. And again, if we go down to the bottom, you'll see that it's now giving details where it says that there's a known number of people, anonymous person, that people where the interested party is a person, people where it's an entity. So you have this information that you are then able to download as a BOD-JSON. So you can see that all here. It's slightly longer than it was before because we've got more information that's been brought in. But I'm going to save that JSON file, and then I'm going to put it into the I'm going to upload it into the data visualizer like we did earlier on. So again, I've got a file that's down here, and I'm going to import it. And then we have this slightly different. This is completely made up, by the way, just to be clear. This example clearly with all this information is made up. But what we now have, if I can zoom in, is we still have Agus and I having this kind of these relationships with Honest Business Limited, but you can actually see that a British Virgin Islands company called Secret Ownership Limited has a shareholding in Honest Business Limited, and that British Virgin Island company has two beneficial owners who are Crook McCrook and an unknown person. So if we didn't have the information from the British Virgin Islands, which we don't because their information is kind of held privately, then what you might see in a diagram like this is just perhaps a kind of unknown shareholder. So you would have, if it's declared in the UK, you would maybe have the information going back saying this is kind of unknown ownership here, and you can't link back to the beneficial owner. But when you have this information layered in and provided from different jurisdictions, then it means you can build up these more complicated pictures about the people who own or control companies that control other companies, as well as seeing some kind of indirect interest that they might have. So ultimately, if you were looking at Honest Business Limited, you should really know that Crook McCrook from the British Virgin Islands has some kind of role in it, and not just think that Agus and myself were the people who were the ones you should look at. So hopefully that's a useful example, and I will stop sharing this now.
Yeah.
Go back to the presentation. So this feeds into we're going to set you some.
Sorry, Steve. There was a question
Okay.
from Andres on maybe it's something related to the spreadsheet before you were going to the visualizer.
Okay.
Andres, you want to jump in?
You can't unmute yourself. We need to ask Andres to unmute.
Hi, thanks, Stephen. Agustina, that was really useful. I had to leave 5 minutes ago, but I have a question, and then I will look at the recording to look at the answer. Could you give an example with a bit more complex? Because I understand that you're just using always this honest as a subject, but what if there is like company one owning this secret company, and then company two owning company one? How do you start building on those? Because I would be interested if you kind of like take company one or company secret as a subject in a different spreadsheet, or if you're always using this one. So if you can give an example of how to do when it's a bit more complex with, say, one or two more companies owning the BVI company, and how you produce the data, that would be very useful. But I have to leave, so just look at the recording to see how how you answer that. But thanks a lot. It's really, really useful. Bye-bye.
Okay. All right, thank you for the question. So I can give people, I can answer that question by giving people a sneak peek into the state-owned enterprises work that I mentioned earlier. So this is a piece of guidance that our team has been working on, and it will be released in published in about 2 or 3 weeks. No, sorry, in about a month and a bit's time. So what I'm going to show you is following on from what Andres asked for. I'm going to just share my screen, and we'll go to this example. So hopefully everyone can see this now. So to help people to understand more about state-owned enterprises and ways they can be owned or controlled that aren't always technically classified as beneficial ownership, we've used exactly the same spreadsheet template to do the kind of more complicated version of what Andres was talking about. So if we go into here, this is all real data that's taken from companies in Indonesia, Nigeria, France, Mauritius, and other places. So you can see these are the real birth dates, the real places of birth, and everything for individuals that we're going to show. You can see that there's a number of legal entities, state bodies, registered entities, unknown entities that are all put in. So again, it's a number of people, a number of entities. And then when we get to ownership or control, it gets more complicated. We have a whole series of ownership or control interests here that are mapped out from people who are board chairs to people who have shareholdings, et cetera, and we have often the exact amounts that have been put together. Now, this has all been collected from the research that our team has done. And if I just move my thing here and I download the file quickly, then I will go and show you what this looks like in the data generator tool. So the tool that we have been using can show off BODS data, whether it's simple, whether it's complicated. And I will just do, sorry, there's something in the way, so I can't upload it. So this company is called Seplat. So we started off looking at information from one country, and we ended up going through multiple countries. And so I've imported the data and I'll draw it. And if I can just show you how this looks now, I'm going to have to zoom out a bit. You can see that we have quite a complicated diagram. I'm just trying to move some things so it's out of the way on my side, and I'll need to zoom out a little bit. You can see that we have a very complicated example. So hopefully Andres will appreciate this. What we can see, again, this will all be published, so it may be a bit clearer once people can look at it themselves at a later date. But we started off looking at an Indonesian company called Pertamina, which is down here. Pertamina has several beneficial owners that are ministers or people in Indonesia. And it's a state-owned company. It's actually a company that owns 99.997% of 2 other energy companies here. Those in turn have a relationship with a French company called Morel and Prom. We know that there's some individual investors and institutional investors who invest in that company, but we're not exactly sure who they are from the details. And then eventually we know that Seplat owns or that Morel and Prom owns or controls shares in a Nigerian company. The Nigerian company has connections to people in Nigeria, also a Mauritian company, a South African company, back to Nigerian individuals, to a company in Switzerland. So you can see that this information can get very complicated, but actually when if we come back to here, we can see there's a lot more interests and about twice as many people as we had before. So we have people listed, so twice as many companies as we had listed before. But it is possible to do this for chains that are simple, for chains that are complicated. So this is an example that we'll be publishing shortly, and happy to share and to talk more about kind of complicated examples that people might want to use with this tool. I guess, should we go back to the presentation? I know we haven't got much time, have we, left?
Yeah, I know. Just a small question. When you go to the ownership or control spreadsheet, And in the beneficial ownership statement, you have true or false. It's true if it's like the direct beneficial ownership, but then if it's false, if it's a legal ownership, right? If it's a company that owns a company, for instance.
It's false if it doesn't constitute beneficial ownership in that regime. So perhaps the percentage of shares is under 25% if they've set their rule at 25%. Yeah, so it's saying is this beneficial ownership? Yes or no. And in a lot of cases, it will only be if you're getting down to the beneficial owner at the end of the chain, and also if you can show that it's above the threshold that's in that, using that country.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
There was a question from Jackie about the visualizer, and then we'll close with the homework and explain the next steps.
Okay. Jackie, do you want to unmute?
Yeah. So my question was about the percentages. In example 2, there were 3 owners adding up to 150% direct. I think it was a bold line, so I assume it's all direct ownership. So is that a problem? Is there a way that the data standard rejects anything that goes beyond 100%?
So I actually, I think I changed it. So that actually me and Agus in the second example, so example 2, we have voting rights, not shareholdings. So I can double check that I didn't click the wrong thing, but we try, yeah, I don't think we added up to 150%. I will double check that. There's not, so the visualizer kind of accepts the data in whatever form it is. It doesn't have built-in checks to stop there being more than 100%. We can flag it, but there's not a kind of automatic stop that will refuse to accept the data if it's entered like that. Aga, shall I hand back to you do you want to talk through the homework?
Yes. So just very quickly, and we will share the presentation and all the links and resources through email between today and tomorrow. So just to introduce now that in order for you to get familiarized with the document, with the spreadsheet, and build your own bots data, we are giving you 2 exercises. You can, if you are not much familiar with the topic or you don't feel so confident, you can just work on the beginners and exercise A. But if you feel more confident, either if you have more experience or if you work perfectly with exercise A and you want to jump into B, it's a little bit more complex. So the first one is just to build an ownership relationship where you own a company together with a friend, with a family member, a colleague in your country. And you can choose, you can choose if the ownership, like the percentage of ownership, the shares, and how it's that. Very straightforward, just as example 1 that Steve did, but you have to build it from scratch. So using the bots data generator from scratch, and as Steve did quite bravely with us live today. And then try to test whether all the fields are in green in the upload tab. If they're all on green, so that's worked perfectly, you can go into the data review tool. And if you remember, visualize it, but then no need for that. We will work more detail lately. If you want to go a bit beyond, you can work in a more complex way where you come with an example where there are 3 shareholders, and of those 2 are also directors of the company and 1 has voting rights. The example should include a direct and indirect ownership relationship. So as you saw in the diagram, we say direct beneficial ownership when there is quite straightforward, Stephen owns 50% of honest business. And we say indirect where there is an entity in between. So as we incorporated secret ownership, for instance. So you can choose with whatever example. It can be a fictional example, or it can be a live example that you are working in a company, in a real life example from your country or from elsewhere that you're working on. But it should include three shareholders, 2 directors, 1 voting right, and indirect relationships as well. If you want to submit this with us and for us to review or to provide any feedback, please do so before October 20th. So we have 1 week before our next webinar to review it. We will make the best out of us to review, to provide any feedback or point out to errors that might arise if the data review tool is not useful for you, but it should be quite straightforward. And if you don't want to submit it to us, just work with these, get familiarized with the tool and think how it can be embedded into your work. We won't be working with this tool in the 2 further workshops we have with us. So if you have any questions or still things that need to be answered, get in touch with us either through email, or if you need support with something, we're happy to help you out with by using the tool. Again, we will share this through email and you'll have all the resources to work on this as from tomorrow. Is there any question or something that it's not understood from the task? Okay, I take that as a no. So with that being said, we will reconvene in 3 weeks' time on the 27th of October at the same time that now at 2 p.m. UK time. And we will be focusing on the open ownership registers and a specific tool will have to work and analyze the data that it's there. So we will get our hands into addressing the data that it's contained in the register, and another one to cross-check a couple of things. We will share the recording as well. I see that you're asking that in the chat. We will share the recording, the slide decks, and further links of everything we said. Thank you all very much for being with us for 2 hours, and hope you have a very nice end of your week and happy weekend. Thanks, Steve, for your presentation and for walking us through this very interesting tool.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And yeah, we'll hope to see you next time for the next workshop.
Bye-bye.